What's up, wizards? Welcome back to Across the Horizon, a collaborative effort between Hacking Fate and Renaissance Astrology. I'm Michael Beeson of Hacking Fate, and with me is Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology. And we are doing the 12th aphorism of the Centiloquium, or Liber Fructus, which is attributed to Ptolemy, but really was likely written by Jafar. And if you want to know more about that, hop on back to the first of this series. Otherwise, stick with us and we'll jump into this. So did you read the last one or did I read the last one?
Yeah, it's your turn to go first.
It's my turn to go first. Okay. So love and hatred prohibit the true accomplishment of judgments. And inasmuch as they lessen the most important, so likewise they magnify the most trivial things.
Yeah, so Partridge says, love and hatred cause error in judgment. For affection magnifies trifles, and envy as much abuses weighty things. So this is really, I think, strongly applicable in horary, but it's true, I think, in any predictive form of astrology, but horary in particular. And it's interesting because, you know, it points up a reality about horary astrology, which is that if you're going to ask a horary question, you really want to have an emotional involvement with that question. It needs to be, the more visceral it is, the better the timing, because the whole basis of horary is the chart of the question. And then what impels you to actually ask the question, to go to the astrologer and sort of complete the circuit, you know, it needs to be something that you really care about, that's emotionally, important to you. And so, for example, relationship questions, I mean, those charts are almost all what I call juicy. I mean, they're almost always very well timed because people really care about them. And it's interesting because I had an email exchange with John Frawley this week, which I was very pleased about because I have a lot of respect for John. And we were talking about, I think it was someone was wanting to ask a question about, what was it? Oh, I think it was like that ship stuck in the Suez Canal, right? And he mentioned that, and I said, I don't know if I would take that as a question, because I said, I'm not sure that the person really has enough of a personal stake in it. He said, yeah, he said he wasn't sure exactly what they were doing either. And he wouldn't, he would also be somewhat reluctant to take that kind of question unless he could figure out if there was if you had goods on the ship or something like that. But it's sort of like, I know Lilly used to do political questions, and he would, would Parliament be successful and things like that. I'm a little more reluctant to do those because, again, I'm not as tied up with it. I'm not, it's not, I mean, if you're a politician, I mean, if you're going to get elected or something, then you'd have an emotional connection to that. But the further you get away from your personal, situation, and the further you get away from stuff that's visceral and emotional for you, the less connection you have to it. And then also the planets, again, the planets and stars and the cycles, the connection to you is emotional, so you're sort of impelled or you're following the same cycle when you're strongly emotionally affected by it. So that's really the key to ask the question in the first place, is that you better really care about it. And obviously if you're love or hatred or whatever, if you care about it, that's going to be a better question. But then the next step is judging the question. Now, if you're going to judge the question as an astrologer, you need to be like Mr. Spock. You need to have the most clinical, unemotional approach to it. Doesn't mean you can be unsympathetic to your client. You don't want to hit them over the head with stuff, but you cannot care how it comes out, because if you start caring how it comes out, it immediately starts affecting your judgment, and this is the problem. People will try to judge their own charts and on their own questions, and they just cannot do it accurately because they really want it to come out a certain way. Oftentimes they want the positive result. They want to avoid the negative result. And what that does is they'll start looking at, like, for example, like relationship question. So you've got the ruler of the first and ruler of the seventh are what we're looking at. So let's say the ruler of the first is in detriment, ruler of the seventh is in fall. They're separating from an opposition. The moon's in detriment. Oh, but look, the part of fortune's in the seventh house. Oh, okay, then that means it's good. And that's the kind of thing you see with this sort of question, is that people really want it to come out a certain way. So they deliberately start looking at factors that make it come out that way. Or I get that with people, I'll do the horary for something. They'll come back and they'll be like, well, what about this? What about that? And it's like, the other thing that people will do is to say, rather than looking at it as a whole, rather than saying, okay, we got 4 negative factors, major factors, and 1 minor positive factor, they want to look at it individually and break it down, and rather than looking at the overall chart, right, and the overall patterning, they start breaking off these individual patterns. And again, the reason they're doing that is because they want it to be a certain result. And astrologers are prone to that as well. I mean, you don't want an unhappy client. I mean, you want the client to get what they want, you know, and that's, you know, you can easily, or if you're doing it for a friend or family member or whatever, I mean, you're going to be affected by that. But if you're affected by that emotion, either in a negative or positive way, then it's going to definitely affect the judgment of the question. And so your overall, and there's two ways. One is just the technique, right? But then also that intuition that we were talking about in aphorism 1, right? I mean, it's incredibly important for the astrologer to have good intuition. And if what you're doing is you're not relying on your intuition, but you're relying on your emotion, that's a terrible guide for things. And it's sort of like intuition is like, I know I won the lottery versus, is that really intuition or is that emotion? So I think this is, you know, this is incredibly important. And it's, you know, and some people get smart about it and they're like, you know, they say, Chris, I have this question and I was trying to judge my own chart, but I know I can't do it accurately. And then they'll hire me to do that. But I think, you know, Bonatti even says in Libra Astronomia at some point, I think in the horary section where it begins, that you shouldn't even do your own questions. You can do your own questions as long as you're able to be totally clinical. So if you can be completely unemotional about your own question, or, you know, you can really tone that down, then, you know, then you can do it. But I think that's one of the things that you sort of learn and practice is that I mean, obviously, you know, I would like to have happy clients or whatever, but that's way down the list as far as I'm concerned from accuracy. I mean, very early on, I decided that my job as a horary astrologer in particular was to tell people the truth. And, you know, you can be nice about how you do that, but nevertheless, I will not compromise in giving the, you know, what I see as the accurate answer, even if it's negative. And it is oftentimes in horary. I mean, if you're worried about something, you know, that's when you ask a horary. If everything's going great, you're not going to go ahead and ask a horary question usually about it. So it's just one of those things. If you're going to be an astrologer, a traditional astrologer, you need to be ready to give people bad news. And if you can't give people bad news, then maybe this is not, you know, an area that you want to get yourself into. And if you start worrying about that, again, that's going to affect your judgment. You know, you need to be able to come in and say, okay, whatever the result is, I just want to look at the chart, see the pattern, get that as accurately as possible. And you cannot be concerned about whether the person is going to be happy or unhappy. And you certainly can't be concerned about, you know, that with your own question if you want to get an accurate answer.
And it's fun that you spent so much time on that, because that's exactly what I think it's getting to as well. And I'll be completely honest, I dragged my feet in becoming an astrologer in large part because of that. I got really tired of doing horaries for my friends, and the answers always being no and strong no's and absolutely not answers. And in the beginning, that was really, really uncomfortable. But then when you start to see, well, if you know the answer is no, how does that affect your life? And how much faster can you move on to the next thing? And seeing the advantage that people have with that opportunity really helped me to kind of come out. I've also become a bit more dry. I'm a bit less people pleasing than I was when I first started learning horary and started learning astrology at all. Astrology is capable of, if you, like you said, it's something that you don't want to smash people over the head with. And you could easily do that because all the books will kind of teach you that, because they're teaching you how to take the individual testaments and turn it into a judgment. And so they're a bit hyperbolic and they're a bit cold. Whereas when you're dealing with a client, you can't just be like, no, this person will never like you or anything like that. You have to have some compassion. But like the aphorism says, you do have to maintain a distance, and you do have to not get caught up in what the client is going to be or what you're going to be like during the process of making that judgment.
I mean, part of it is, I'm a lawyer, so, and I'm also a very Saturnine person. I have, you know, like a Saturn and Aquarius rising. So, you know, it's comes a little more naturally to me. I mean, at the same time, I'm Sun Pisces, so I am very sympathetic to people, but I have this side of me that's able to, you know, to stand back and be objective about it. And what I would say about that is that there's plenty of sort of psychic readings out there that, because a lot of times people are looking for a reassurance reading. I mean, for example, someone will come to me and say, when will I get a job? And they haven't had a job for a year. And that's like, I just have to have a job. And I'll say to those people, I said, look, is it going to be useful if I come back and say you're not going to get a job? And then a lot of people will be like, what? I have to get a job. And I'm just like, this is not what this is about. This is not for you to feel better. It's to get an accurate answer. And unfortunately, the accurate answer, it could be both negative and positive. I had someone the other day is like, when will my job situation at my current job improve? And I'm like, you can't ask a question like that, because when will I assumes a positive answer. It's like, will it be next week or 3 weeks? It's like, it may not happen. When will I become president? Never, So it's just one of those things. It's like, I think my clients are really brave, because if they're coming to me, they're risking getting a negative answer, and they know it too, but they're like, you know what? I want to know the truth. And what you find is that the really good clients, and people really appreciate this. It's like, you know what? The accurate information is very useful, and the stuff about tell me the truth, but make sure it's what I want to hear. That's not somebody that's going to be able to make good use of this information. But nevertheless, people realize after a while, they're like, my God, this is really accurate a lot of the time. It's not 100%. And that's very useful, because if I know something's not going to work, well, maybe I can change my plans based on that. You know what I mean? And so it's like, it really is, it takes a certain level of sophistication to be able to appreciate getting an accurate answer, as opposed to somebody who's like, but I haven't had too much problem recently. I mean, I had somebody actually today who was starting to sort of argue with me about the astrology of a horary reading. And I haven't had that so much. I mean, I think as I've done this more, maybe I'm getting better at kind of communicating to clients about it. But I think people really do appreciate the opportunity to get your view of what's going to happen. And I think that's, part of, in your marketing or whatever, you just want to, if you're going to do horror, you just want to make that clear to people, that you can get both a negative and positive answer. So when people are ready for that, or you screen stuff too. Also, you want to, like I said, when will I get a job? I don't even want to take that question unless they know what they're in for with that. And sort of that reassurance reading is something that you just don't want to set people up for that stuff. And so I think this is a really important, I mean, just as a practical matter for horary astrologers, you just need to really live this, because like I said, it's that binary thing of, if you don't care about the outcome, it's not going to be a good horary. But if you care about the outcome, you can't judge it. So the importance of emotion and the importance of whether it's positive or negative, and the importance of dispassion, I think are just something that's really, it just really paramount, very important as a horary astrologer.
I think from a philosophical perspective too, it's really important that you hold truth as the highest value instead of any one consequence that might happen. Because if you hold truth to be that, at that point, you can maintain that objectivity. Whereas if you're holding up, well, I need this to work this way, then you're going to be clouded in the way you look at things. Kind of like the way that when we look at the different things that we want to happen in the world, we have a view of how we want it to happen and how we want what we want that result to be. And one of the things that you have to do, especially if you're going to a horary astrologer, or if you are a horary astrologer, is you really, really have to take a look at that and say, okay, I value the absolute truth over any of my preferences. And like you said, I think that's definitely where we're at. And I'll go ahead and let you have one more last word on it, because otherwise I'll be rambling about this all evening.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how some of these will bring out stuff. Here's the thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to be reassured. And I don't think there's anything wrong with making people feel better. I don't think there's anything wrong with listening to people's problems and, and being sympathetic to that and giving them this hope. But that's more of a counseling function. You know what I mean? That's, might do that for a friend or for a relative or something like that. You might do it as a, like I said, as maybe social worker or something like that. But if I went to a doctor, it's interesting, like in Japan, I don't know if this is true anymore, but in Japan, if you were dying, they wouldn't tell you. They didn't want to bum you out or whatever, and they wouldn't tell you the truth. And it's like, whereas certain people, you want them to tell you the truth. Like I said, if I go to my doctor I don't want him to be like shining me on or just trying to make me feel better. I want to know what's really wrong with me and what the prognosis is, right? And whether it's, if even if it's bad, it's like terminal, it's like, okay, how many months how long do I have, doc? You know, that's what you want from that situation. Again, same thing from a lawyer. I mean, you don't want someone to come in and just and BS you about your case. You want to know exactly, okay, how good a case do I have? Do you think I should, what should I do? Giving me specific advice about it. So that's what I was saying, is that really it's a question of saying, what is my function? And then also for people to know that clearly. And so that's what I would say, is that it's just horary astrology is just one of those fields where, just like you said, the truth is paramount. And if people are trying to use that as a way of reassurance, then that's their problem. But if you are clear with that, with yourself first, and then with your clients, then you're going to be of the most help to people, because then you're going to screen it and make sure you get the people that are in agreement with you, that really do want the truth, regardless of whether that's positive or negative, or goes their way or doesn't go their way. So I think I think it really does point to that sort of, the higher function, the oracular function of the horary astrology, and in a really almost a sacred way.
Well, I guess that's it for this week. We'll be back with Aphorism 13 next week.